Hello, everybody.
Is it rolling?
Oh, yeah,
we're
good
good.
to get back to the agenda.
You're gonna switch to the useless messaging view? All right.
Yeah.
Good. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Server-Side Community Q&A. Mikkel has drawn a little puzzle on the landing page, so if anybody can answer that.
That'll be a surprise.
There's a surprise, maybe not gift. We don't know. We'll have to figure that out later.
They're gonna get it like right away.
They're gonna get it right.
It's a yank.
It's a yank. Wow, that's interesting.
That's a different answer than I think was written for. But getting warmer.
Yeah.
Really warm.
Getting warm. Getting warm.
You only get one guess though.
So the first thing is we've got up on the screen there. Want to make sure everybody knows there's a new release out as of
Good call. I didn't see it.
days ago. Yeah, last week.
Well, you can see.
That was about
Oh,
the
August
date,
9th.
look, the date's on it. About a week ago.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a date there, I think. I knew that was there for a reason.
Yeah. Just want to make sure that there's full release notes there. Grab it, give it a ring. And in other than that, any other major announcements? Any other stuff coming up that we want people to know about, or just swing right into Q&A?
I think we just jump right into it.
Okay. So if anybody got any questions, feel free to type them in the messaging area, or just start shouting at us, and we'll do our best to answer them. Okay. So the first one from Ashu. Remoting listeners throws a missing method exception. Usually when we see missing method, it's that the SDK that your app is built against is running against an older cluster. So if you updated, say, the NuGet packages but didn't update the local cluster or something like that, then you could see that. So that's something to look at. That's a situation.
So by update, you mean just reset the cluster?
You have to install the latest runtime. So your runtime has to be caught up with the SDK.
Yeah, it's older things can run on top of the newer runtimes, but not the other way around, right? Your missing features or interfaces have changed or whatever.
Yeah, so basically in the SDK, we'll add new functionality, but sometimes we have to also add something in the runtime to make it work. So if you have a new SDK but an old runtime, you might get something like a missing.
Got it.
Yeah, so you can do an older SDK on a newer runtime. So when we do updates, when we upgrade your cluster in Azure, for example, that works fine. So your runtime will be on a newer version, but your SDK is still an older one. That works fine. We make sure that works, but not the other way around.
Got it. Thanks.
And so that's just WebPI, and make sure that the SDK and tools are up to date as well. If that's a local machine. If it's a remote cluster, then the same thing. Yeah, make sure that it's running the same or a forward version.
Yep.
Next question from Racine. Roxy V, certified collection. Performance file collection of embedded Roxy V. Is this expected? I mean, I don't know that we've done a real comparison against Rox, so we'd have to go look at it to see what the differences are. The thing about Rox, I don't know whether or not Rox is going to do the replication for you automatically if you have it set up to do that. So that might be part of where the performance hit is coming from.
No, it's not.
Yeah, not usually.
You didn't say that,
I know. So that's usually where some of the latency might be coming from the collection side. So, I mean, we'd have to profile it to see exactly where it's coming from, right? I mean,
yeah,
we should figure it out.
It would be interesting to see how you're configuring the two and what you're testing against. So like, what size payloads you're putting in, how frequently, how many keys you're using, that sort of thing. I think it can always vary on a lot of factors. We see this type of discussion come in a lot where people will profile us and they go, oh, you're slower than Redis. And we go, well, you're running your Redis with no replication and no persistence to disk. So yeah, Redis is going to beat you. So figuring that out, we're happy to dig into it, but that's my first guess as to where part of that performance difference is coming from.
Yes, Bob. I am using synchronous writes in RocksDB, I'm not using any kind of replication. That would be my second question, but I will ask it a bit later. But I don't think that replication is the reason to decrease entire throughput by the factor of 10, because the load is very multi-threaded, and it uses entire CPU and so on. So it's like it feels like Service Fabric is a bit slower, and maybe it's related to some structure of database, because RocksDB is very optimized to memory use and SSD usage. So
yeah, I mean, the other thing you might want to look into is the serialization. I don't know if you customize that as well, because by default, Service Fabric, the collections are going to use Net Data Contract Serializer, and that's kind of unfair.
No, I'm using binary. I'm using my custom binary serialization, and it's like I'm using the most low-level APIs I can access from the managed side. So I will now try to use some unmanaged APIs if they are available for Service Fabric.
See. Okay. Downloaded a new SDK a few days ago. So far, just a little problem with the SF tray icon. Antonio, what's the problem? Is it? I've seen a case where I click on it and it takes a little while to respond. I think we're still chasing that, figuring out what that is.
Yeah, that's exactly the problem. It takes minutes. The first time when I boot my computer, it takes minutes to appear the right click menu, the context menu.
Yeah.
And then there's just the setup my cluster option, which is already set up because the cluster is already started. Then I say, okay, set up the 5 node, and then the answer is the node is the cluster is already set up, and then from that time everything starts to work fine. I mean, the icon is responsive again. But the first time when I boot my PC, there is always this problem. It takes minutes, to.
Yeah, I've seen it as well after a sleep and wake cycle.
I think we've got a bug open again.
Yeah. When I power on my PC, it does it always. Yeah.
If you could do us a favor and go to the GitHub issues list and make sure that there's an issue open for that, or if not, create one so that we can track it and let you guys know when we figure it out.
I discovered it a few hours ago.
Yeah.
So I will do it. Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Common upgrade. ASF rel, I think Manny answered that. So the rel release is coming in the next few months. There's going to be a preview of it. If you have any other questions, we can address that. Roadmap ETA for full functionality on ASP.NET Core for Windows and Linux, and then you could get kind of app portability.
Oh, with full portability. Okay, so you're talking about being able to compile against .NET Core, is what you mean there. So you can do full functionality of ASP.NET Core today with reliable collections, but only against full .NET framework. So in an upcoming release later in September, we will have all of our SDK NuGet packages will be compiled against .NET Standard 2.0. So at that point, you'll be able to compile your services against .NET Core 2.0, and then you get the cross portability between Linux and Windows. But the caveat, though, is at that point, reliable collections on Linux will still be kind of in a preview mode. Still you'll get the full functionality on Windows. You'll be able to run it on Linux, but just as a preview, and then at a later time after that, that'll be released as a kind of general availability. So that's coming up fairly soon.
Yep. Appears to be a limitation when using both service remoting and own listeners inside a single service. Limitation appears to be the remoting listener needs to be the first one in the list of communication listeners. Huh.
So yeah, and so there appears to be a hard coding, like when you use the Visual Studio template, by default, like the first endpoint you get is with the name service endpoint. So if you have a listener in your service manifest with the name service endpoint, the create remoting listener will always pick that up, no matter what name you give to the function.
Oh, I see. That should be configurable though. So there's kind of a convenience extension method that's called create remoting listener. I think that one will pick that one up automatically and use a bunch of default values that we've picked. But if you create a fabric transport remoting listener manually, like you use that class yourself, I think you can specify all that in the settings object.
So don't use the remote. And then the other thing is like in the list, like the array that you create of remoting listeners, the IEnumerable, if your remoting listener is not the first one, then the clients have trouble talking to it.
Huh. Okay, that one's news to me. I can take a look into that one for you. Let me make a note
No,
of
because
that.
this problem was there back then. I attended a hackathon in November.
Yeah.
The problem was there at that time too.
I see.
So I'll probably can put some sample or like raise a bug issue on GitHub.
Yeah.
If
If
you
you've got
wanna
if you've got a snippet that you think does it, just dump it into another issue. And that the reason that we recommend the issues is just so that we don't. First of all, it helps us remember what we're supposed to get back to you on.
Sure.
And second of all, it helps us close the loop so that when we fix the bug, we can say, hey, it's in this release, or
Sure.
we can have a dialogue
Yeah.
after this meeting.
Ideally,
Sure.
if you go into our GitHub repo for reliable services and reliable actors, that open source repo, if you can open it up there, that would probably be best. And then
Okay.
The right guys will.
Okay. Thank you.
But yeah,
Yeah, thank you.
If that, we'll look into that. That sounds interesting. Dates roadmap for the GA of Linux Service Fabric on-prem. I don't know, Manny's been.
So, yeah, I can take that. So this is also something that's on our roadmap. So it's going to be coming in the next several months.
Okay. We did that. In the Service Fabric cluster, D drive getting full. Freezer space also. What is recommended? So, Samir, you're about whether it's filling up space. It'll depend on why. There's two things that we know can.
Wow.
Somebody.
Not on this time.
Is that you? That was deep.
Deep. Anyway,
You get
there's a few things that we know that'll cause your drives to get full. One is that shared log size is static. So once you create it, it shouldn't get bigger or smaller. So if it's too big, if it's bigger than the drive is to start with, then yeah, that config will limit it. However, if you're seeing a situation where as the service runs, the drive keeps getting fuller and fuller, and it's those log files that look to be growing and growing, there's two potential causes. One is that there's something that your service is doing where it's writing just like an infinite amount of data out forever, and that'll slowly fill up the drive. It depends on a bunch of factors around how we compact logs and all that stuff, but that could be part of it. The other part of it is that there is, I don't know what operating system you're on, but back on, I think it's before Server 2016, there's a bug in the file system in Windows where it's an interaction between the transaction log, some sorts of AV scanners or things that look at a bunch of files, and the file system. And what happens is that every single time something opens up that file or scans it or looks at it or whatever, it gets a little pad on the end, and it doesn't get freed up like it should. And over time, if that virus scanner, if your Defender is scanning like every day or something, over time that number of pads will just keep growing and growing, and eventually it'll look like the whole machine is out of memory or out of disk space. That's a known Windows and interaction thing between a lot of these virus scanner things and Windows then. So that might be it. It's kind of hard to say without looking more at your particular thing, which of these things is going on. Usually it's just that there's a lot of data going on, or that the log got started too big to begin with. So let us know if that makes any sense for your case.
Okay. So my question is that in one of the article, I got these tags to be added into the ARM template using shared log size. So will that help?
That decreases. There's like a static. That thing normally starts out at 8 gigs and it just sits there. It never grows. It never shrinks. It's a big allocation up front, and then we use that as kind of a log, circular log for the transaction logs. Changing that setting only fixes the problem if the 8 gig allocation up front is too big for that machine, right? If say you're on like an A1 or something, something tiny, right? Then you want to make that smaller. There are some performance implications. So if that log is smaller, then we have to do checkpoints and coalescing and things more frequently in order to make sure you don't get wedged. So you can play with that, but if you're still seeing that log file get larger than that allocated size, then it might be the Windows bug that you're hitting. And the easiest way to get around that, I think you.
We are not able to hear.
Folks, we are not able to hear you, so we lost the audio.
There we go. So I don't know if you heard the end of that question, but basically there's a file system bug. And so you could try to get onto server 2016 and see if it goes away. I also heard your question about does changing the log size up front help? And again, it's a static allocation, so once it's laid down, that size won't matter.
Hold on. Matt, we're still having issues.
Are you guys still out?
It's not muted anymore.
It's not muted. You guys.
We can hear you.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay. It's back. Okay.
One more.
Okay, we'll monitor and we'll let you know how is the behavior of the logs.
Some folks are still saying.
Yeah, some can hear, some cannot.
Okay.
We can hear you.
It looks like some people can. Joda, can you hear us?
Yeah,
Let's see if Joda.
I think you might be rejoining.
Okay. Well, we'll proceed and we can figure out what's going on. Mark will defer. So there was a question
on health reporting timestamps not showing up in Service Topic Explorer.
I think that's just SFX hasn't gotten to the point of showing that.
So part of it is that SFX is just supposed to show the latest health report.
Right.
So whatever you see there is the most up-to-date one. It's not meant to be like a long-term store of health reports that you can look at over a period of time. So that piece is one part that might be interesting for your understanding. We also output all of the health reports through a channel where you can subscribe to that in your ETW provider, wherever you're storing your infrastructure and platform logs, and generate a full data store and history of all the health reports that have come out of your cluster. So if that's something you care for, then you should probably go and set that up, and don't use SFX as a way of, don't use it as a historical store of health. Look at it as just a point in time understanding of how your cluster and applications and services are doing.
You skipped one there, Deep. So there was a question just before that about reliable actors design.
Yeah, the big one.
Yeah, and the first part of that was single-threaded turn-based calling model by the actor runtime a simplification, or was there a technical limitation? So that's by design. That was done intentionally to try to simplify.
That is the actor programming model.
It's the programming model. It's meant to simplify read and write access to that state manager. And the follow-up to yours, where you're asking if it's thread safe. Depending on what you mean roughly by thread safe, the idea with the single threaded access though is to kind of force thread safe behavior so that you only are accessing one key at a time or one part of the state at a time. So that all that part is by design. Now, so onto the behavior that you're seeing. So under when you list out this normal behavior, that's all fine. Under the not normal, okay, let me draw this out because I see what you're doing and I've seen this happen before.
Yeah, because all I did was, it's kind of a same simulation. It's just that the actor runtime is not aware of that thread, but it's still a single thread inside an actor.
So it's basically this. So when you have an actor method here, everything, basically your code is in here.
Yeah.
And what the actor runtime does is effectively uses a semaphore slim to lock this entire thing, right? So this gets exclusive access.
Yep.
The other thing that you get is there is a transaction that's opened up over this entire thing. So this entire thing runs inside of a transaction around the state manager. So when you do a task run, like so, and then you execute something in here, and then you just allow the method to finish without awaiting this. This is the transaction's going to close and the lock's going to close, and this is going to run outside of that scope. So if you do any operations on the state manager here, that's where you'll see some weird behavior.
Yeah.
So you definitely don't want to do this. You want to stay within the locking and within the transaction of the actor method. So we generally don't recommend doing this at all unless you're doing things that aren't touching the state manager. But if you're touching the state manager, you want to do it within the scope of that transaction, within the scope of that lock. So you don't want to do a task run in there.
Got it.
This will definitely lead to some weird behavior if you do that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick follow-up on the health event. If you see health messages in SFX and you actually go to the object that is the health event is attached to, you can see the timestamp and the details.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry.
It just
you got to get all the way down to the actual specific replica or service or partition or whatever, and then they show up in a table. Okay, let's see where we are here. We noticed that then we did that. Okay.
Back
We also
driver.
no. We see the temp drive being filled up. Restore gone bad that repeats over and over. Just mentioned how to clean this up. So when you say a restore, this is you're using the reliable collection backup and restore APIs, and so the code I imagine is fetching the backup from somewhere, copying it locally, trying to do the restore, and then the restore fails, and then you've still got that local copy. Maybe that's the situation.
Yeah, that seems to be the problem that we're seeing, and what is happening we're trying to figure out why, and we have a support ticket open on this right now, is the restore operation keeps getting triggered over and over and over and over and over again. We have something like, I think it's like 26,000 restore directories before we ran out of space. So obviously something was looping and it wasn't our code calling it. So I think there's two things going on. Why was it, calling the restore operation so often? And then, obviously there's probably some housekeeping we need to do to make sure we keep that clean and that doesn't, get out of control, even if that were to happen again.
Yeah, the default code doesn't implement on data loss, which is where that restore would happen. So I don't know what would cause it to loop like that on its own. The default implementation of data loss is it just kind of gives up and keeps going, which isn't exactly ideal, which is why we tell you to override it. But that's a little bit confusing. So maybe we'll see what the support folks come back with on that one. But I know that there are cases. So say, for example, one of the things that can happen when you do a restore is, unless you force it, Service Fabric, the collections detect whether or not the data in the backup is newer or older than what is in the actual service. So if you try to restore something that is older or stale relative to the data that the replica actually has, it tells you that it throws an exception and says you can't do that. But at that point, you've already copied that backup locally, right? And so that's when the cleanup would need to happen in those types of situations. But yeah, we should look into why that's even happening in the first place in your case.
Okay, so sorry to hog this, but follow-on question to that then. So we saw that restore policy safe, and that has the behavior you just talked about where it's the state is older. Yep. But in a typical restore, wouldn't your state be older? So should we be setting it to force? What is confusing is the current docs show it as the default being safe, which is what we've implemented.
Yes. In any sort of high throughput or sequence where your services are getting written to almost all the time, there's pretty much no, it's very unlikely that what's in the backup is going to be newer than what's in the service, right? So think about it. You're taking a backup every 5 minutes, but you're replicating continuously, let's say, right? In that case, what's in that replica is probably newer than what's in the backup, right? So the backup might be the consistent, it's a safe spot. It's the end of the day. It's whatever, right? You're fine. But that's not necessarily newer than what's in the replica. The replica might have gotten the operations from the existing primary and has more stuff than what's in the backup, right? And so it's up to you. You can say, yep, I'm willing to go back in time and lose whatever I had applied in this replica because I want to get back to that known, consistent, good spot, that backup. That's my SLA. I don't need to worry about it to be more specific than that. But you also might want to have to look inside the replica and really do a comparison to see where those two different pieces of consistency are at. Is this making any sense?
Yeah, I think so. So in the case where, we needed to do a restore because somebody did something stupid mechanically, like
I deleted the service.
Yeah, or no, just I deleted something that impacted state, and they're like, oh, that's a mistake. I want to go back to the backup. I actually do want to go back in time.
Right.
We should be using force.
Right.
In the case where, I just want to make sure that, I'm not losing data, and if the primary has up-to-date data that's better than what I have, great, use that. Otherwise, use the backup. We should use the safe, correct?
And one of the things that we've seen people do is restore the backup into kind of a staging service so they can poke at it and really do a comparison between what is currently running and what is in that backup, and then make a kind of next level decision to actually go and apply that backup. One of the things that we're building is also kind of a data viewer so that you can point that at the backup when it's still in, blob storage or whatever, and then explore the data that way. But those things should help you make this sort of decision. But yeah, if it's I dropped something, if it's I deleted some stuff, if it's I mutated things incorrectly, then you want to go get the backup and apply it. If it's I experienced a data loss event, like an actual disaster, you usually want to be a little bit more careful because applying the backup might mean going further back in time than you really want to. That's just the trade-off.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so that's much clearer. Thank you.
Okay, and I'll work on updating the docs.
We are always working on those docs.
Even better.
Yeah.
By the way, you can help with the docs, right?
Yeah. There's
a little edit button on every doc. If you find small errors, things that needs to change, just press the edit button and you'll send a pull request through for the docs.
We love PRs.
It, and that way we get more manpower to help.
Yeah, that's useful because I find errors in Mikkel's docs all the time.
You do?
All right, you've shamed me into updating the docs now, so I'll make sure one of us does it. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. GitHub is amazing. So, there was a question here about blob back drivers, but Manny, I think, got it. Work in progress.
Oh, the volume drivers, yeah.
How should we perform VMSS upgrades in our production environment? So, do you do auto or manual? If we have durability greater than Silver, we're else we do auto upgrades. So, first of all, I would never do it if you're not at least at Silver. If you're at Bronze, then what the VMSS update will do is it'll just kind of blast through. It'll just kind of step through the environment. It also depends a little bit on the type of upgrade that you're talking about. If you're talking about like an OS update, those you should be using the patch orchestration application that we provide.
We have that installed.
Okay. If you're talking about like, say you wanted to do something like change from an A series to a D series, or change the size of the VM really at all, or change the OS version manually, those are more disruptive operations. Usually they will cause VMSS to drop the temp drive and drop the drives. And so when they come back, as a great example, switching from A to D or scaling up the VM size, your temp drives are going to get wiped out, which means that your state's going to get wiped out. Now, Silver will, if VMSS tries to come and take away a machine, right, that your application isn't healthy because it's rebuilding somewhere else or doesn't have enough replicas or whatever, Silver and above will stall that operation, but it only stalls it for a limited amount of time. I think it's like 15 minutes, and then Gold is a couple of hours per upgrade domain. Now, in practice, that's almost always enough time. We don't actually see a lot of cases where it isn't. Where you can get into a problem, though, is if there's something wrong with the VMSS update itself. So, for example, VMSS and Azure in general has this lovely property where you can ask for machines that don't exist in that given region. So you ask for G boxes, and there aren't any G boxes in that region. Depending on how exactly you trigger this update, it will start trying to make that happen. It will start taking away existing machines and start trying to vision that those don't exist or there aren't any available. And that now becomes kind of a maintenance operation where you have to get in touch with the Azure folks, and we have to figure out how to provision machines that the services can move to, but we can't stop that model change that's in place. When you get into these types of things, we usually say add a new VM scale set, move the services over, and then destroy the existing VM scale set. That's just a much safer way to go about it that avoids a lot of these issues. If you're talking about a scale operation where you're trying to scale in or out, there's an article which we can link or somebody can find, which is called Programmatic Scaling. And that walks you through kind of, for these types of operations, how we recommend that they're performed in order to avoid any sort of downtime or data loss thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if you could send that link.
Yeah, we'll get it into the comments. I can find it, or somebody can find it.
I think it's got
So any kind of normal scaling then if we follow the advice in that article.
Yeah,
Oh, you got it. I got it. Yeah.
Oh, man.
So it's only if we're changing the type of machine, then we should.
Yeah, I'd say if you're changing the size or type of machines or changing the operating system, then it's something you want to be a lot more careful about. If you're scaling in and out, then the programmatic scaling one will be a pretty good way to go about it. It does require some work, but the key thing is that you're trying to get Service Fabric to sign off on these machines can go away before you tell Azure to take them away. Because we'll tell you if there aren't enough resources left in the cluster, or the placement constraints don't work, or your service is already in some bad state. That'll happen all at the Service Fabric layer. And then once that's all cleared out, then you can tell Azure to take the machines away. If you tell Azure first, it has to complete that update, which means that now you're in that time crunch in case anything bad happens. So we try to front load that work.
And that's the difference between silver and gold, is gold allows more time for that to happen.
Right. That's the difference. Even with gold, we'd recommend doing it the programmatic way, where you tell Service Fabric to do it first, rather than just having auto scale or VMSS level changes taking the machines away. The silver and gold stuff is also for these are for your initiated actions. There's also Azure updates and things like that just sweep through the cluster all the time, hundreds of them. Gold and silver are, if any of those updates start causing issues, that starts to give us a time to push back on those updates. Gives Service Fabric a chance to try and recover your thing, or gives support a chance to swing in and figure out why the update is impacting your application.
Okay, thanks.
No problem.
The next question on DNS, no, that's not expected behavior. Can you please open a GitHub issue so we can look into what's going on?
Yeah, we expect to be better than kind of working.
Yeah.
There's definitely a problem.
There's some room for improvement.
High standards.
Yeah.
At least that's not expected behavior.
Yeah. Definitely open an issue for that on GitHub for us so we can look at it. Nick, is there documentation on how Service Fabric implements data contract serializer? You say your team is running into an issue where serialization on your test is different than Service Fabric memory. Yeah, so we do something special. I posted a link to some documentation we have on how we do that serialization. So we use a net data contract serializer. I don't know if that makes a difference for you. It might not, but take a look at this doc here. The main thing that we do is for simple types that are listed here, we don't use data contract serializer for these for efficiency. So if you have, for example, an integer, which is 4 bytes, then we don't wrap it in a giant XML payload. We just serialize that directly. So these things don't go through data contract. Everything else does. That's the main thing. If there's other behavior you're seeing, if there's more detail that you need, again, feel free to open an issue on GitHub for that too, and we can add that to the documentation. But let us know if that helps.
Will there be support for ASP.NET without Docker? Yeah.
You can do that already
today.
Sure.
I think if you just
It
look
will
up
be ASP.NET Core, right?
Yeah.
Are you asking about ASP.NET Classic?
I think
If you're asking about ASP.NET Classic, then sorry, no. Then in that case, no. ASP.NET Classic you have to put into a container, because ASP.NET Classic has to be hosted on IIS.
ASP.NET MVC 4, 5?
Yeah, but it's basically anything before Core. So if you're not using ASP.NET
Anything that
Core,
relies on IIS.
yeah, anything. If you find yourself referencing system.web, then system.web is deeply tied into IIS, and the only way to run IIS on Service Fabric is inside of a container. So that you have to containerize. Yeah, we always recommend switching over to ASP.NET Core whenever possible, but
we realize that's work.
Yeah, that's work. So if you can't, you can always stuff that into a container and host it that way. That's the only way that you'll be able to do it. All right.
Gavin asked, after deploying a cluster by an ARM template, the cluster is stuck on waiting for nodes, and no nodes show up. First thing you should do is look to see, Gavin, if the actual VM scale set is provisioned. You can go into the resource group and look for the VM scale set resource. If the VM scale set resource isn't there, then that means there's something in the ARM template that's preventing the VM scale set from coming up or being provisioned. That could be cert issues, that could be permissions, that could be there are no VMs of that size available. There's all sorts of things that can cause the VM scale set to not show up. I would go and look at that. Scale set, if scale set is there not started, starting it, still no nodes. Yeah, I mean, then you get into, it could be something in the cluster configuration itself. So I would start to make sure, I would make sure that like the machines are there, that you can RDP into them and they're normal from VM scale sets perspective. If you're still not getting nodes up in your Service Fabric cluster, then usually there's some additional information that'll come back from our extension that'll point you in the right direction. But I would say if you're not getting that, or it's not making sense, or it's not good enough, I would open an issue, and we'll work on not only figuring out what's going on, but helping to improve that diagnostic so that it's a little bit more self-service. Okay, Samir asked how to update an existing cluster using ARM, download the ARM template, and do changes and upload again, IP load balancer. Yeah, Samir, we've seen some cases about that recently where some of the Azure resources were handing back malformed JSON, actually. So you weren't getting things templatized correctly.
That's if you download the template.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know if
normally you shouldn't do that. Normally it's smart enough to see resources that are already there, and it just won't touch them if they haven't changed. Right. So you can take an existing ARM template and redeploy it with just some small tweaks in certain places, and it'll figure out what it needs to change. There's also, there's different modes. You can do the kind of the Delta update mode, and you can do a complete override too. Those are options when you go and deploy the ARM template. But by default, it's just doing a Delta.
What, post versus patch or whatever?
Yeah, something like that. Oh, no. Well,
versus patch?
Yeah, I was thinking in PowerShell, there's a switch. But anyways, yeah. By default, that shouldn't happen. It sounds like when you're downloading that ARM template from Azure, you're getting something weird back. Yeah.
And we've seen this report about the IP load balancer stuff getting confused, so I think it's a problem on that side. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I would look into it that way. You can also explore. I don't know if you know about resources.azure.com, but that's a pretty good, basic graphical explorer where you can look at a particular resource, edit it, and then patch it, write it back in. That's a good way to do these types of experiments and figure out what might be going on.
Okay, thank you.
Do we plan to support deploying SF clusters across regions to support GeoHA in an upcoming release? Yeah, so that's technically already possible. I've got a doc update out to walk through that. We don't have an example template that we're publishing yet, but basically there's a couple extra configuration flags that you need to pass to Service Fabric to make sure that it's operating correctly in this type of environment. But other than that, it's just making sure that the VM scale sets are in different regions. We'll be making more announcements and probably talking about that scenario more in the future. It's not really been something that Service Fabric it's not a new scenario to us. We have customers that have been running that way for a long time. It's just making sure that that environment works and makes sense, and that we have good guidance for you to tell you when to use it and how to use it. But yeah, that's going to be coming. We were told that you didn't guarantee your SLAs yet on that. Well, that's bogus. So okay. It's just another cluster. Service Fabric doesn't care where the VMs live, really. It's all about getting those VMs up and getting network connectivity. If you've got VMs and network connectivity, then you can build a Service Fabric cluster. And then everything works just the same as it would across a bunch of racks. So we've had customers, Cortana runs across multiple data centers all day, every day for years, and they've had pretty good results there. So okay, that's not something I'm worried about from a Service Fabric technology perspective. It's usually a management deployment, ensuring that the other resources are configured the way that you want, and then validating that environment even makes sense for your application. Right? Some things just can't handle the latency.
Yeah, the SLAs had to do with latency in calls between services.
Yeah, I don't think that Service Fabric even makes any guarantees about latency within a set of racks.
We don't make those guarantees to begin with, because we can never guarantee that there won't be network latency even within a region.
Yeah. So if there's latency, if the latency that you see across two regions isn't sufficient, that's a conversation that we all need to go have with Azure networking, which is what we've seen before.
Got it. Okay. Thanks.
No problem. I think we finally made it to the audio kerfuffle for new questions.
Integrated backup service thingy. Yeah, what's up with the integrated service backup?
So there should be a preview for that coming in the next couple of months. probably around all his conference season that is coming up. And again, what that's going to get you to is a point where you won't have to write a bunch of backup code. You get integration with Azure Backup, so you have some sort of, not only Azure Backup, but you get basically policy. You get number of full backups, frequency of incremental backups, number to keep, basic scheduling, that sort of stuff. One of the things I always like to talk about on backup and restore is the hard part is restore. A whole bunch of backups can happen, but they're going to happen on different partitions and different services at different times. If you go and restore that en masse into a different environment or the same environment, you're going to have services that are slightly out of sync with each other. And so practicing that and making sure that your services can actually handle that restore is the majority of the work. So we're going to be helping on the backup part. We're going to be helping on triggering the restore part, but you're still going to have to do a lot of work to make sure that when you do those restores that your services can handle that and that you end up in a consistent place. But yeah, next couple of months you should be seeing a preview of that actually land. Did anybody answer Marcin about rocks?
I don't think so.
So the first part about maybe the volume driver, I know that Manny's probably going to tell you to hang on because that's still in preview. If you were going to try and weld rocks onto a replication stream, you could do that, but that is not currently documented or described how to do. And we're not planning on documenting those APIs anytime soon because most people don't need them, frankly. It's one of those things that we'll get to. That's probably work on me to do. Skipping through all the audio stuff to make sure I don't miss any of the questions. Marcina, so there are native APIs for reliable collections. There are not today. There might be in the future as we get further done with the Linux stuff and the port to native. You might see native APIs for that pop out, but at this point we don't publish those. Faisal asks if there are guidance on when to use actors or reliable services.
There's the actor intro guide actually gives you a good idea of when you should and shouldn't use actors, just based on what the programming model allows you to do. We don't have a set of case studies or scenarios just yet, but that's something that we're trying to work on now. Looks like there's a little bit more interest in that.
Yeah, I think that is something that we need to work up.
Yeah, I think what we'll probably end up doing is publishing a couple of scenarios that we've seen out in the wild that were pretty successful with actors and using those as use cases. I mean, ultimately, it's hard to cover everything, but we can give a few examples of that. Yeah.
Thanks, Boss. That would be great. Would you be publishing those to the case studies like we have the BMW and other customers at the team blog?
Not really customer case studies, but just guidance on architectural styles that work and patterns that work well with actors. Okay. So for now, read through the actor intro doc carefully. That has some good information, but it doesn't give you that complete architectural guidance. So that's something that we'll look to publish.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Wes.
Yeah.
Okay. Locking behavior of state manager. Stable service has methods called asynchronous stable service, same app, same. You could get cascading fabric store timeout exceptions that would lock up the stable service. I think you skipped one. Concurrent.
Yeah, you skipped one.
Oh, did I skip one? Okay, go ahead and I'll think about how to answer this one.
Oh yes, deleting an actor state and the state not being removed immediately. This be verified. Yeah, it should be a lazy delete, so it probably wouldn't get deleted immediately. How can this be verified? Well, I don't know if there's a way to verify it, but
I mean, you could.
What exactly do you want to verify that the state was actually deleted? If it's not getting deleted ever, then that's just a bug in the system. So I mean, it should get purged eventually.
Yeah, but it kind of gets marked. That actor object gets marked as deleted, and then it gets progressively swept out of the system over time.
Yeah, there's no real way to check that it's actually been deleted. If you try to call a method back into the actor, it'll just get reinstated again. Yeah. So no real way to go and check, but it will.
You could look at you could drop down to the actor service level and look at the state manager, I suppose.
You could look through the state manager.
I
Probably wouldn't though.
I wouldn't.
That's
a little
implementation
gnarly.
detail stuff.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't go that far.
But that's about the only way I can think of. Usually, looking at the size on disk, it's too conflated with a bunch of other stuff. Yeah. So Jared had a question about timeout exceptions from the state manager. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say exactly what happened in that case. We have seen timeout exceptions where you're still transacting on a key. And so if you have a key that is highly contended, there's lots of things that need to read and write to that key. And those transactions, those operations are being held open for a long time, then the timeout exception that you're seeing is deadlock detection, right? This task came in, started a transaction, touched the key and is writing to it and isn't done yet. And then this other transaction comes in and tries to do the same thing. One of them's going to win, right? One of them's got to win. And so you can get in those races and one of them's going to time out if one of them takes too long. And so it's possible that you had that sort of highly contended key situation, and then by reducing the throughput, you're doing okay. But another way to do it is to look at those transactions, see how long they're taking, or see how long they're taking to complete, reducing that scope of time. We've also seen people for the highest throughput of keys. This is a database technique. Is you basically do key sharding, where you take the same key and you divide it up into a bunch of buckets, where you actually are writing randomly onto one of these 3 or 4 different versions of the same key. And then if you need to count or aggregate or do something else later to get a consistent count or something back, then you can do that. But I would say look at also the transaction time and see if you can spread out that workload maybe a little bit. Okay. You can also, I don't know exactly what the transactions are doing. You could shard it into different actual data structures as well as another option that we've seen people do.
Sure. Thanks for the advice.
That makes sense.
Yeah, we also tried upping the timeout default time like up to like 30 seconds or something, which seemed to us should be like way more than enough time for any concurrent operations to complete. But I don't know. We definitely need more telemetry to fully understand. We're just in the initial stages of trying to understand.
It's usually key contention, or you're getting hit at. It's just taking more time because of other things. So serialization, which conveniently this article is open on the page here. If you're serializing some complex type, that can eat into the amount of time. If the disks are slow, that can eat into the amount of time that a transaction actually ends up taking. Networks are slow, whatever is keeping that transaction scope around longer could be contributing.
There's also the timeouts are also primarily there to avoid deadlock situations. Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't paying attention to what you were saying, as usual. But
that's
I don't know.
I'll just be over here.
There's a situation where if you within a transaction, if you get an object out of the dictionary, and then you later update that same row within the same transaction, when you get the item out, you have to make sure to set the lock mode to update.
Yeah,
if you leave it, if you leave the default lock mode to shared, then you can get into a deadlock situation, and that's where those timeouts will start to hit. And then it doesn't matter what you set the timeout to; it's just sort of waiting, because you can have 2 open transactions basically waiting on each other. I think one of these, if you see the documentation that we have open on the screen, there's a section of transactions and locks down on the left there.
Yep.
In the table of contents. Yeah, I think that goes over that situation. So be aware of that. That might be something that you're running into.
Yeah, what he's talking about is
locks here. Yeah.
Lock, shared update exclusive, like this stuff. So you might need to also tweak that in order to help prevent those deadlocks.
Yeah, just look for a situation where within a transaction you read an item, you read a key, and then you update it within the same transaction.
And try and put it back.
Yeah, make sure that read operation is taking an update lock.
Okay.
And if it's not, then that's where you could run into deadlocks.
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for the advice.
Yep. Yeah, no problem.
So the next question about the cloud service to service fabric migration, I posted a few guidance links that we have. What's the best option for migrating work on web roles into service fabric? I hope they will suffice. There's some pretty specific guidance on that.
Okay.
Advice for demo?
Demo?
Yeah.
Demo SFF. Using a low budget VM.
Let's give a shout out to party clusters.
Oh,
Party clusters.
Hey,
Party
there you
clusters
go.
are great for demos.
Yes,
that's a good idea.
Yeah, it's true. If you need a demo cluster, go to try.servicefabric.azure.com.
Try.servicefabric.
Why are you so skilled at those?
Why are you good at this?
There
Yeah,
you
why are you
go.
good at that?
Ooh, Mikkel, what?
Oh, this is where you are most of the day. He's down here practicing on the keyboard.
Yeah.
And then Edge.
And there you go.
Oh yeah, that's
Firefox on
great.
this thing. All right.
Yeah, how do I get Firefox on this giant Surface screen?
HTTPS, buddy.
Seriously?
Yeah.
It didn't figure that one out. So.
There you go. Hey! Okay, party clusters. These are free. They're unsecured, but you do get a random server address or a random cluster address that's kind of dedicated to you. So
you get
these
your
are
own.
Yeah, you basically get your own. There are I think 3-node clusters, so you can use these for up to 1 hour, and then it expires, and we delete the cluster. But you can come back and create a new one. So if you do have a demo, this is one way you can do it, and it'll just stand you up a 3-node cluster for free. No subscriptions, no signups. We just need you to sign in for to prevent bots. Make sure you're human. But that's it. So we recommend that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And if I want to for more than the time of party cluster, which one do you recommend? The 1-node cluster on Azure? If I need a longer time, let's say if I need to leave the demo online for the users for 6 hours.
The problem with the OneNodes is that
the cluster with 1-node is better than the previous option I used with the dev machine on Azure, the VM.
Yeah, I think it depends on what kind of demo you're doing, because with a 1-node cluster, you're limited to what you can actually show, because you can't show any failovers, for example, or any scaling or anything in a 1-node cluster. So I'd probably recommend doing a 3-node cluster and picking a small size VM, like a D1 would probably work for that. So it depends on the kind of demo you're doing.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Where are we?
So I guess the on-prem issues that Shlomi talked about, Deep and him they're in a deeper conversation here.
Yeah, I see what you did there.
Side thing.
I fired a Mikkel for every time you made one of those jokes.
Oh my god. All right, before we get into a pun war, this could go on for hours.
I think Marcin has an argument.
No.
Is it still a beef?
No, don't. Disease. Marcin asked if I open a reliable collection of transactions, snapshot isolation level, and I'm doing only reads. Is it okay to have a very long transaction here? I mean, is it okay? It should work. It shouldn't cause deadlocks or things like that. But it does mean that you're keeping the kind of everything you touch. It snaps the entire thing. So you have a lot of resources outstanding for while that transaction is going on. I also think that because of that, you might hold up certain operations on the collection that we have to do, so where we compact things or scan through or figure out how to trim stuff. Some of those will get held up behind that very long snapshot. So I wouldn't keep it open for an indefinite amount of time. I profile it. I can't imagine it's going to be a big deal, but you could run into something. No immediate red flags.
But you don't expect to cause any logs, for example, to block any delete operations on these records, but it should work, and it will just keep the resources locked and no actual logs on the keys. So
as far as I know, but like you wouldn't be able to delete that entire collection. That would get held up.
But we are talking only about physical deletion, not the logical one. Yes, you can delete the logical keys. There are no logs there.
As far as I know, yeah, that shouldn't be held up. If you're seeing something else, let us know.
Okay.
Thanks. Yep.
6-foot games services. Are there any plans to release a mock-in solution for reliable collections so that we can write unit tests that can be executed outside of a deployed application?
Yeah.
So ETA.
Yeah, so you can do that today with reliable collections. They should be fully mockable because everything's based off interfaces. We don't have mocked versions of reliable collectors released officially, but some of our sample applications have some mock libraries that you can use. But everything should be fully mockable, so you should be able to test all of your reliable collection operations outside of the Service Fabric runtime by injecting mocks. So it starts with, in your service constructor, you can inject an implementation of iReliable State Manager. So you can inject a mock reliable state manager there, and that mock reliable state manager can then create mock dictionaries and mock queues. We have a couple examples out there, but we haven't released an official library of mocks just yet. But you can do it today, though. Yeah.
There are a few of our customers have posted stuff on GitHub around this. I'm actually trying to find a specific one that I can.
Yeah.
So take a look there and see what
we should probably all pile onto one repo as opposed to us checking different versions in each sample we build.
Yes.
Not that we do that.
Not that we do that. Okay, moving on. Is there any work or exploration of new programming models going on, or are we focused on adding functionality to existing model and services? The answer is yes.
A or B? Yes.
Yes. So there is some new stuff going on that we will unveil fairly soon, and at the same time we are also focusing on adding existing functionality and of course bug fixing to the existing ones. So yeah,
that's also an acceptable answer. So
fantastic.
If you need us to choose one of them, we're not good at that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got it. We got autoscale.
In case of downscale, there's a way to handle stop or shut down events, so ongoing process can be completed to avoid rope termination. Samir, it depends a little bit. If it's going through the management role or if you're silver or above, what will happen is that your service will get time to shut down, but if it's the primary and it's doing work on the collections, the write status to the collections gets revoked immediately. Really, there's actually a grace period already under the covers that we've already given you by the time you see that write status get revoked. But once that's happened, you're not going to be able to do any more, you're not going to be able to make any more progress. So if you don't need the collections to complete the work, if you're just computing and doing some stuff, sure, you can take time and drain things out. But if you're touching the collections, that's going to stop sooner. And that's because we're really trying to progressively, move the workloads off the machines to make sure that upgrade can swing through. So the cancellation token gets canceled, and then it's kind of up to you to check it and move into a branch of your code where you're actually taking that into consideration and trying to clean things up and shut down. And there are timers. If you take too long, it'll start to say, hey, this is taking too long to shut down. You'll see those warnings. If you're not seeing those warnings, then that means everything's working fine, and you don't really need to worry about it.
All right, GA date for Linux, looks like Manny got that covered. Yep, that'll be end of September. Program models, again, will still be in preview. That includes reliable services, collections, and actors will still be in preview at the time. Especially about cloud services is already marked as classical, and is there a date declared obsolete cloud services? So the classic part of that actually refers to the Azure deployment model, which basically just means the cloud services doesn't use the resource manager model.
The non-ARM.
So it's non-ARM. So that's just referring to that deployment model. There is no actual date for obsolete. We don't, at this point in time, we have no plans to actually deprecate or obsolete it at all for Microsoft. So you can continue to use cloud services if you like. Lots of questions for Deep. I guess you're answering those.
Where does Blaze go to ask questions before escalating to support? I posted a question in the MSDN forum. Oh, geez, yeah, the MSDN forum.
I think we actually called it out. We have this support site, right?
Yeah, there is
a support site that will guide you where to go. We generally recommend GitHub and Stack Overflow. We tend to be most active there. We try to cover MSDN as well, but that ends up being a lot of places for us to cover. So Stack Overflow and GitHub are probably your best bet.
Yeah.
For general, by the way, if it's general questions about architecture or how-tos or something, Stack Overflow is usually going to be better for that. If it's actual issues with the product, or if it's feature requests, or feature ideas, or something like that, or change requests, those are better suited for GitHub. I think it's in there. Yeah. GitHub repo, Stack Overflow.
Okay, Nick asks. Are there any downsides to enable default services upgrade? I mean, I'm of two minds of this. No, turn it on. If you're using default services, then turn it on. Because it will make default services make some sense or make more sense when you go and change things. But there's a whole bunch of pitfalls to using default services, which we should write down and describe somewhere. We don't generally recommend these days that people go to production using default services. It's kind of more like default services should be an opt-in thing that you use when you understand all the complexities around them. They're really good for that F5 getting started experience on your local machine. But if you're talking about doing rolling upgrades and trying to update replica counts and things like that in production, usually we don't recommend using default services for services deployed there. They just get a little confusing about what actually is happening.
So if you want to get out of the default services game, the newest tooling update of the Service Fabric tooling in Visual Studio actually supports doing debugging without default services.
Right.
And making sure that Visual Studio doesn't change the application manifest when you add new services as default services.
That was like
I think it's in the release notes.
I think it is, yeah. Let's see.
General notes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so there's somewhere here. There is a way to do it now.
I would switch to that because that gives you that nice experience.
It's in the full release notes, isn't it?
It gives you that full experience and keeps, lets your debugging keep working, but doesn't get you into this sort of confusing things. Default services can be a little confusing because they mix the type information, right, in the manifest with the instance information like replica count, instance count, the partitioning scheme, all that stuff. And that's when the upgrades and the updates start to get a little confusing. So we do recommend kind of separating them. And the new VS tooling finally helps us make that a little bit clearer.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There it is. Yeah, so debugging without default services. There you go.
Yeah. Okay, we're almost at the bottom.
I think that is the bottom.
We gotta wrap up. Wow. Perfect.
Marcine's last one.
How am I supposed to restart back up on a single node cluster?
Just store back up on a single node cluster.
I mean, the same code should be there. I mean, is there something else that doesn't work? Or, tell you what.
There is no fault analysis service on a single node cluster, so basically I am not able to induce the data loss event.
We should probably just turn that on. Yeah, I mean, we can just do.
Guess that, Jota?
Jota got close.
Oh yeah, no one. Okay, no one's guessed Mikkel's riddle. Should we just tell him?
Should we do?
So the answer was a piece of licorice. Mikkel's been bringing a lot of licorice into the office lately.
Oh, it's so good.
Yes.
The best thing about it is that no one likes it, so I get it all.
I was gonna say,
all to yourself.
disagree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So much
There we go.
Yes.
John, I'm with you.
So no one
Okay,
gets
the next-
surprised here.
It's a Danish thing.
The next Service Fabric poll will be about licorice. We don't want to know about features or anything. We're just going to ask you about licorice
Just
things.
licorice.
We need a licorice code name injected somewhere.
I don't even understand this conversation.
Anyway,
Anyway, we're out of time. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks everybody for coming, and we'll see you at the next
I
one.
actually
of these.
brought that as well. I
Long
just
as
didn't
right,
bring
exactly.
it to the office.
Thanks everybody.
Join us
You're being
next
late, you
month
don't
on
know.
the 21st.
All right, thanks everyone.
Bye bye. Yeah.
Bye.